I will talk basically about two things. One is the first half of the lecture will be the use of, will be something like a prolegomena to a use of Marxism in politics, in, let's say, left-wing politics in general. So this will be some epistemological and some methodological remarks that show, at least in my view, why Marxism is not only relevant but indispensable for a Marxist theory for left-wing politics today. So this will be a general first half of the lecture. The second will be an examination of some contemporary cases or examples which show that Marxist theory is not only relevant in general, but is also relevant for capitalism as we know it today. So, because we all know that capitalism has changed, actually existing historical capitalism has changed a lot from the time that Marx wrote his economic works from 19th century until today. So probably the most common objection to using Marxist theory today is that it's anachronistic, so that it's no longer relevant. So in the second part of the lecture I will use some contemporary examples and try to show that this theory is still not only applicable to contemporary capitalism, but probably the only theory capable of really explaining it in order to change it. This is the basic political motivation of Marxist theory. So this, the first half or the first part of the lecture, I called it, I titled it the Fetishism of capitalist social relations. And my starting point would be, I will do the reverse from what Marx does in his book Capital, because he starts with some, Marx starts with some very basic, simple abstractions to derive more complex concepts, which the more complex they get, the more they approximate actual capitalist social relations. And then in the end of certain chapters, he included certain notes on fetishism. I will do the reverse. I will start with the fetishistic forms of appearance of capitalist social relations and try to derive those social relations from their appearances. So my basic starting point is that capitalist social relations, especially social relations that have to do with social subordination, domination, exploitation, and so on, in capitalism are non-transparent. They're not immediately perceptible, or they're not visible to our everyday spontaneous conscious. Or to quote Jacques Rancière, we were talking with Artan yesterday, and he told me that Rancière is coming to Skopje soon. And in his very old text from 1965, he has this interesting quotation which says, the relations which determine the capitalist system can only exist in the form of their concealment. The form of their reality is the form in which their real motion disappears. So this is the basic formula of what Marx called fetishism, not just commodity fetishism, which is probably the better known, but fetishism of all basic social relations in capitalism. So in Marx you can also find theory of fetishism of money, of capital as means of production, of capital as money, and so on. So basically not only are all, or every basic social relation in capitalism necessarily appears in a mystified fetishistic form. This is my basic proposition with which I will start now. I will try to explain it. So what does this mean, that social relations in capitalism necessarily appear in an inverted, mystified form? Rancière, in the mentioned quote, deals with the interest-bearing capital, which is, according to Marx, the most mystified and fetishized form of capital. And probably, because of this, probably a good entry point to explain fetishism in capitalism. Since credit and production are dissociated, so the process of credit lending in capitalism and the actual process of production are separate. So banks and companies are separate institutions. So you have institutions that deal exclusively with money lending, which are banks, or capital markets, but we won't complicate, let's say just banks. And then you have companies who take this money and engage in actual productions, but these two types of institutions are separate. Banks don't know what companies do, and companies also don't know what banks do. Their only relation is that money goes from one institution to another, and when companies make enough money, when they make profit, they return the money to the banks and so on. So this is the basic cycle of production, so they are separate and dissociated. Money capitalists or bankers lend money to productive capitalists and don't get involved in production themselves. So bankers who lend money don't know what goes on with their money. They just want this money returned with interest in due time. So if you consider production, the relations in capitalism from the point of view of the banker or money capitalist, are not only production relations concealed or invisible, but also the production process itself. This is what Rancière is talking about. So if you take the point of view of interest-bearing capital or money capital, the money that goes from banks to the production, from the point of view of the banks, you don't know what happens to this money. You just see money mysteriously increasing in quantity. For example, you lend 100 euros to a certain company, and then after a month you get 110 euros. So money appears to be growing by itself from the point of view of, at least from the point of view of the banker. And this is why Marx and also Rancière called the interest-bearing capital the most mystified form of the process, because money appears to be growing by itself. It appears that money by itself has this mystical power to increase in magnitude in the form of interest. But we don't have this. This is just one example where social relations in capitalism do not appear as what they are. So when we talk about money lending and the magnitude of money increasing by way of interest, we can exclude, I mean, we don't see the actual process of production. We don't see the actual process that brings about this increase in magnitude in money. We just see some sum of money and then increase sum of money and so on. So this is one of the simplest but also the most pronounced form of mystification of social relations in capitalism. But we don't have to go all the way to the most mediated and at the same time most mystified form of capital, which is interest-bearing capital, to notice how strange and how strange to everyday perception capitalist social relations are. Because the fetishism of capitalist social relations hold true also and even in the most common everyday cases. So this is probably because I don't think any of you are actual bankers or money capitalists, so it's probably not an example that is very close to your everyday life. But I will name some more examples, 3 more examples that are based on our everyday experience that basically everyone who lives in capitalist society experiences more or less every day. So first I will take the example of the most ordinary and used thing in capitalist society, money. But not, in this case, money not as a form of capital, as a form of money that increases money, but just money as means of exchange. So everyday use in money. So to explain the fetishism of money or the fetish character of money, I will take several steps back and explain how social production is organized in capitalism in general. I think if we are dealing with fetishism, the most important feature of organization of social production in capitalism, and that it is at the same time social and asocial, or is socialized in an asocial way. This probably sounds really strange, but also Marxist terminology always sounds really strange, so it always needs some further clarifications. So basically what I mean by asocial is that production in capitalism is organized in an indirectly social way, which means that firstly, social production is separated from individualized consumption. So when we work, we don't consume, at least for our everyday needs. We consume the means of production and so on, the raw materials, but our actions, us as workers, as people who have to get money somehow to survive, and the most common way to get money in capitalism is by hiring yourself out to somebody who has enough money to pay you to do some work. And while we work, we do not consume. So these activities are strictly separated. After work, we spend money which we get by working. We go shopping, and then we come home and we consume, or we consume in a cafe, but we don't consume at work. So this is one way how the process of social production in capitalism is organized in a asocial way. So the separation of the activity of production and which is socialized, we work together with many other people, but when we spend money, we do it in an individual way. We spend our individual money, which we have in our individual bank account. So so basically our main motivation to go working is to work is money. So we work now to buy things later, and don't necessarily, or mostly we don't buy things that we ourselves produce. So this is another indirect way production is organized in capitalism. We produce things for the market, not for other people, and not directly for other people or our individual needs. We produce them for the market, and if they get successfully sold, the capitalist who hired us gets profits and pays us, and then we buy things on the market that somebody else produced. So this is one basic separation in capitalism. The second is that individual productive units, say individual companies, are also separated and independent from one another. So, for example, you can have hundreds of companies in one country that produce tables, but they don't know about each other. They just, from the perspective of one individual productive unit, you just know that there is some kind of competition out there, but you don't know how many companies also produce tables. So even if they produce the same thing, consciously coordinated by plan, but by the market relation of competition. So basically, if you take the perspective of individual workers, or if you take the perspective of individual companies, you can see that the relations which they establish with one another are never direct, are never conscious, are always market mediated. So in the case of productive units, this is the mechanism of market competition. In the case of workers and their relation to work and consumption, it's money mediation. You work to get money, and then you consume by spending your money. So it's market exchange. So this is basically what I mean when I say that social production in capitalism is asocial. It is social, of course. It's not autistic or psychotic. People do get into relations with each other. People do things together. They work together. But what I mean by asocial, that their mutual relations are not direct, are not conscious, are not planned, but are market mediated. They are mediated by an objective, impersonal mechanism of the market. So basically, but for this generalized market exchange and market relations to be possible, there has to be an independent embodiment of value, a universal equivalent form of value, which is money. So basically, money is the thing that makes such an asocial sociality in capitalism possible. So exchange, money changing hands is the most basic and also one of the most fetishized forms of social relations in capitalism. So we can exchange money for any commodity. So with money we can buy anything that is on the market if we have enough money. Depends on the magnitude of the money we have. But it is not immediately, precisely because a capitalist society is in this, in a sense, asocial. It is not immediately obvious why money has such immense power. So, and since social relations which have invested such power in money are themselves indirect and asocial, money appears to possess such power on its own, simply because it appears that money has such power simply because it is money. Its power appears as its own inherent natural property. So we think that money gives us power because it is money, not because certain social relations, which are not expressed in a direct way, but are mediated through market exchange, invest certain social power in money. So basically, in other words, when we look at money, where we have this fetishistic perception of money, we misrecognize social relations invested in money as a property of the thing money itself. So we make fetish out of money and believe it has mystical properties on its own, and at the same time we mystify and conceal social relations of which money is merely a vehicle. Because without these social relations, for example, if you take money, if you take Macedonian dinars and you go to some Polynesian tribal society which doesn't use money for their exchange relations, it will be worthless. So we can see from this simple example that money does not have power on its own. It's useless in a tribal society, or let's say in a future communist society which will abolish money. So without the social relations invested in money, does not have its power. But in our everyday perception, we necessarily see the power of money as somehow mystically emanating from money itself, and social relations invested, charged in money, remain unseen. So this is first example of, let's say, what Marx calls fiction without fantasy, or the religion of everyday life in capitalism. Another common everyday example is the fetishism of capital in the immediate process of production. So in the working process, we tend to spontaneously fetishize capital when we do actual work, when we go to work, especially if you work in a classical industrial relations situation, but it's not necessarily. So in capitalism, not only to explain this example of what do I mean with fetishism of capital, in capitalism, not only production and exchange, but also individual people's access to social production is asocial. So you cannot, as an individual worker or citizen, you cannot just enter some production unit. For example, you cannot just decide, today I will be a bricklayer and just go to a construction site and start laying bricks, because they will throw you out or call the police or a psychiatric emergency vehicle. You have to first sign a contract. You have to approach an employer, and if employer judges you fit and skilled enough for work, and if the employer needs another worker, he will hire you, and then you can access construction site or any other workplace. So you cannot just waltz in there and start working. So this is another example how social relations in capitalism are asocial. You cannot just directly start producing stuff, but you have to go through some kind of market exchange. In this case, this market exchange is you signing an employment, approaching an employer, or an employer approaching you, and signing an employment contract which promises monetary exchange later. So basically, just to summarize and simplify, whatever you want to do in capitalism, except for the probably breathing and sleeping, you have to make one kind of market exchange or another. To go back to our example, if you want to approach a workplace, if you want to engage in social production, you need to be hired by somebody. You need to have an employment relation. You need to have you need to sign some kind of a contract. Unless you don't, but we will exclude the example of moonlighting and paying on the hands. Let's pretend that we live in an ideal capitalism where all the work is done by contract and paid for, and so on. And this contract, which mediate access to social production in capitalism, are always signed and conceived on an individual basis. So you cannot approach an employer with a group of friends and say, we are a unit, we understand each other, and so on. We will work together, we will share a task. It's impossible in capitalism. So you need to sign individual contract. Everybody approaches social production as an individual, and then the later combination and cooperation of workers is organized by the bosses or the managers. So you cannot choose the way you cooperate with your co-workers. This is decided by the manager at the workplace. So because you approach social production in an individual way, and you are later assigned your co-workers and who, in what way you will work with, you enter social production as an individual, but then you somehow get combined. You don't consciously choose with who will you work with, how many people, in which way, but it is basically the personification of capital, the manager who decides how will you cooperate with one another. And the very fact of bringing many individual workers together already automatically raises their productivity. So if you have 10 people working together, it's automatically their productive force is more than a sum of its parts. It's more than 10 people working individually, but since you approach social production individually, and since it's the manager who organizes the cooperation and combination of the workers, of the many workers in the workplace, the increase in the productive force when many people work together appears as if it emanates, as it originates in capital, not in the workers themselves. So basically the indirect, individualized, atomistic way of approaching social production and let's say alienated way of how social cooperation within the working process is organized in capitalism makes it seem as if capital is responsible for the productive increases that basically originates in the fact that many people work together, but they appear as if they were brought about, or they're the fruit of capital, because you approach individually, and then you do not choose, you do not control the process of your cooperation. So this is the fetishism of capital in the immediate process of production. Capital appears to possess this mystical power of increasing productivity as its own inherent feature. And the last example, this first part is maybe a bit technical because it's a lot of Marxist terminology, but I consciously choose to put this at the beginning while you still have more concentration, and then the second part will be much easier to follow. So this is the last example in this first part, which I have called the fetishism of the wage form. So basically, I hinted at this before. But just to repeat it, to view it from another perspective, one of the basic characteristics of capitalism as a mode of production is that it is social production is organized for profit, not directly for people's needs. I mean, people needs have to be satisfied, otherwise nothing would get sold. But this is purely secondary from the capitalist point of view. Capitalists want to make profit, not satisfy people's needs. And if satisfying people's needs is a way to make profit, then okay, but it's completely secondary. It's not the primary motivation why production in capitalism takes place. And also, as you can probably see from the everyday social reality in not only in Macedonia but the whole region, if some needs, social or individual needs, remain unsatisfied, but their satisfaction is not profitable, then no investment will take place, and you will have 30% of unemployment, you will have hungry people, and you will have, on the other hand, you will have very rich people who will hoard money because they do not see an opportunity to invest it profitably. So basically in capitalism, people with money do not invest their money to feed hungry people or to satisfy any social needs unless it's profitable. So profit comes first, satisfaction of needs comes later, if at all. This is from the perspective of capital, from the perspective of ordinary people who have to work to get their money, who do not possess the money which they could invest or not, but more or less spend all they have month in and month out. You also don't engage in work because of the work as such. I mean, you can believe that what you do, I don't know, or that it helps people, especially if you're a doctor or an architect or some other liberal profession. But basically, this is also secondary. Primarily, you work to get money to pay your rent and electricity and buy food and cigarettes and so on. So, from both perspectives, from the perspectives of the capitalist and from the perspective of worker, primary motivation to engage in social production is monetary. So, capitalists want to invest their money to make more money in the form of the profit. Ordinary people just want to get money to survive. So the actual process of production is completely secondary in both cases. So, but since we work not primarily to do certain things, actually most people hate things that they do at work, and they cannot wait to get home, but they still have to, because otherwise they would not have any money and would probably die from hunger. So basically our main motivation to work is to get enough money to satisfy our everyday needs, at least our basic everyday needs. So this is also how we tend to perceive what is a fair or a decent wage. So a decent or a fair wage, according to our common everyday perception, is the one that covers the costs, the historically and socially contingent costs that we have. So it depends on the prices in each country. But once we can buy enough food and pay our rents and electricity and go for a beer on Friday, we will consider our wage a decent or a fair one. So by this very fact, because social production and consumption are separate in capitalism, and because we spontaneously tend to define the fairness of our wage according to our everyday needs, according to money amount that can satisfy our everyday social and individual needs, we tend to overlook a simple fact that we are exploited in the working process, that the value we produce is actually bigger than the value that comes back to us in the form of the wage, because we do not measure spontaneously. If we do not think about our wage and our working process in value terms. We think about it in the terms of our needs and our consumption. I mean, we spontaneously, as workers, we spontaneously have consumption theory of wage, or spontaneous consumption theory of wage. We don't think about our wage and wage relation in terms of value or production. So the whole point of capitalist enterprise, which is to invest a certain amount of value in money terms, to produce something, sell these things on the market or services, and get a bigger amount of money that we invested in the beginning, this whole process escapes us if we think from our individual position as workers. And for this primary investment, this first amount of money to increase itself, to generate profit, there has to be somewhere in between in the process of production, there has to be a moment of exploitation. So workers need to produce more value that they are compensated for. But this basic fact, because we do not think about wage in terms of production, but in terms of consumption, this whole fact escapes us. And also not only that we overlook this very basic fact that we are exploited in the production process, we also confuse actual work done, actual concrete tasks or activities that we do at our workplace with our labor power, our generic capacity to work. So at the moment when we sign an employment contract, we imagine that what we are selling, that the exchange that is going on, that we are selling our future concrete working activities, the work that we will do in the future for the employer with which we are entering into contract agreement. And also this is what the contract says. If you read an employment contract, it says this guy will do this amount of work for me in this period. It's talking about concrete working activity, not anything else. And this is quite absurd. I mean, if you think about it, it functions, but it is mystified. It's absurd because at the moment of signing an employment contract, we are selling something which, not only something that we do not have. We do not have this concrete work yet, so we cannot sell it. This is the first absurdity, the first of the employment contract. We are selling something which we do not have and which doesn't even exist yet. So it's doubly absurd relation, but also for but we do not recognize this mystical transformation that go on in the moment. We just sign the paper and then go to work to collect money later. But in actual fact, our labor power is a potentiality. So when I talk about labor power, it means our generic capacity to work, not the actual work done. And our labor power as a potentiality becomes actual labor only when we actually work. So this is which takes place after we sign the contract. In the moment of signing a contract, we are pretending to sell something which we don't really have, and overlook the fact that we are actually selling our labor power, not our actual labor for a specified amount of time. And this fact furtherly conceals the fact that exploitation is going on in the workplace. Because if we knew that we are selling labor power, not the concrete amount of actual work, then it could enable us to think about the working process in value terms or in production terms. But since it appears to us, because of the way employment contracts are conceived and the way we think about and the way we also actually approach social production, we think that we are selling our work. So if we get some money, whatever amount of money for this work, we said, okay, but we sold our work, this is the amount of money we got, so we are compensated. So the fact that some more value is created in the production process than is covered by our wage can only appear to us as a fruit of capital or as a result of capital. So we have double mystification or double fetishism going on at the same time. First is the fetishism of the wage form, which tells us that we sold our actual work, our actual labor, not our labor power, which also tells us that this labor power was fairly compensated by the wage. And at the same time we have fetishism of capital, which tells us whatever surplus was generated in the working process, since we are fairly compensated by our wage, since it appears that we sold our work and got money for our work, not for our generic capacity or potentiality to work, it appears as if surplus or profit somehow mystically emanates from capital, and then we could just shrug our shoulders. We can say, okay, capital is productive on its own, it has its profit, it's justified that the profits would go to a private capitalist. So this also shows how fetishism not only conceals the actual social relations in capitalism, but also helps reproducing them. If you think this last two example of the fetishism of the wage form and the fetishism of capital actually justify and help reproducing capitalist system, because it appears that there is no exploitation and that it is right and justified that profits go to capitalists while only wages go to workers. I could go on with these examples. Marx's economic writings are full of them, from Grundrisse to the very last chapter in Capital 3. There's a lot of examples of fetishism of this and that, but my purpose here is not although I would like to talk for 3 hours just about theory of fetishism in Marxism. We can already see from these everyday examples or everyday perceptions that are deceiving. So basically this whole long and very technical and complicated introduction was just to show that our everyday common sense is not enough to decipher the fetishized forms of appearance of capitalist social relations. Therefore we need theory. If you just go on and try to see things as they are, we will only see mystified forms of appearance. We will not be able, with our naked eye, or let's say our naive common sense, we will not be able to grasp the capitalist social relations for what they are. So I think that much is certain. We need some kind of theory. We need some kind of intellectual effort that is able to go beyond these fetishized forms of appearance. But what kind of theory do we need? I think it's a huge non sequitur to just jump to conclusion. If you need some kind of a theory to see social relations in capitalism as what they are, to a conclusion that this theory necessarily has to be Marxist theory or any kind of Marxism. Even more, we could ask ourselves, isn't Marxist theory hopelessly outdated in the 21st century? And shouldn't we look for a newer theory which is more appropriate for our time? So before I begin defending Marxist theory from this accusation, I would just like to make a short note that Marx was writing, as he often mentions in Capital and in other works, he was writing about the ideal average of capitalism, not about this or that concrete historical manifestation of capitalism. So when he was writing in the 19th century, he wasn't writing about British industrial capitalism, but he was writing about capitalism as such, about social relations in capitalism, which can at least potentially outgrow and survive different concrete historical forms that capitalism takes. For example, classical industrial historical form, and then a so-called Fordist and post-industrial or post-Fordist. So it is Marxist theory is concerned with these basic social relations in the ideal average of capitalism. And so if we can show that these basic social relations of capitalism are still with us today, then also Marxist theory is still actual and relevant, without regards to changes in, let's say, in everyday culture, consumption patterns, deindustrialization, rise of new technologies, and so on. But if we say that it is still relevant, and actually it does not mean that it is kind of a holy scripture which explains everything for all eternity. It just, at least what I mean to say in this non-dogmatic Marxist sense, that it is still useful as an answer for everything. And it's also, like any theory, it's also always in need of updating. So three main accusations. I will simplify to the point of caricature some basic accusation that we hear today about the outdatedness and irrelevancy or anachronism of Marxism. But they basically comprise one sociological theory, which is called by different names. So sometimes you will hear economists or sociologists talk about the middle class society. Sometimes they will talk about the rise of the knowledge society. Sometimes they will talk about the rise of the post-industrial society. So you have a lot of authors that talk about it. You have a lot of books written about it, at least for at least half a century now, from the 50s and 60s on. But in some sense, all of these theories and all of these authors, in their ideal average, they want to show that Marxist theory is not really relevant anymore. So I will just fuse these theories together in some kind of caricature of ideal average and try to refute their basic presuppositions. So I will call this middle class post-industrial affluent society. I know this might sound a bit cynical in Macedonian context with the very high unemployment rate, high poverty rate, and so on, to actually talk about these theories from the 50s and the 60s. We started in the 50s and the 60s, and they projected the rise of living standards, full employment, and how capitalism will abolish class antagonism and will bring welfare and employment to everyone. We could be tempted to just ask these hypothetical sociologists to go outside and for empirical reality to refute them. But I still think this type of theories still have to be taken seriously. I think the critical power of Marxism depends on how successful it is in critiquing not only the really existing capitalism, but also the most ideal hypothetical form of capitalism. In other words, Marxism is successful if it shows that not only today in Macedonia capitalism is obviously responsible for a lot of misery and unemployment, but to be able to refute even this type of political argumentation that you commonly hear from especially liberal politicians and economists, when they say, but this is still not yet true capitalism, so we need more capitalism, we need more efficiency, we need more market. What we have in Macedonia or Slovenia or any other Eastern European country today, this is a crony capitalism, it's corrupted capitalism, it's political capitalism. So basically what they do is they do not close their eyes in front of the miserable reality, but they say that this miserable reality is a product of certain country not being capitalist enough. So, so speaking is really in practical political terms, we also have to be able not only to critique the actually existing capitalism out there on the street, but also this ideal projection of capitalism that politicians and liberal economists use in this type of, let's say, political mobilization. In other words, we have to be able to show that capitalism, even if in its hypothetical ideal state, is still wrong. I think this is the highest critical achievement that Marxist theory is capable of. So to go back to the middle class post-industrial knowledge society thesis, it goes to sum it up, this theory that I will later criticize. To sum it up shortly, it goes something like this, but it was written, I mean, it originated in the Western Europe and the United States of America in the 60s, so it is understandable because of the upward cycle of capitalist accumulation at that time. That was no time of crisis, but the time of biggest expansion of capitalism in all of its history. So employment, wages, living standard were actually rising, at least in the Western Europe and America in the 60s. So, so it's no wonder that this idealized picture of capitalism, theoretical idealized picture, grew in that particular historical and social circumstances. So, to finally start, this theory goes something like that. With rising living standards of the working class and expanding service sector and public sector, exploitation and class struggle are deemed a thing of the past. Rising living standards and welfare institutions abolish violent class confrontations. High incomes of the working class mean there is no more exploitation, and deindustrialization and expansion of the service sector mean there is no more proletariat. So basically what this type of theory wants to show is that somehow the development of capitalism itself, I mean, it sounds kind of weird in times of crisis, but let's pretend in the moment that we are in a rich society in times of capitalist expansion, and that wages and employment and living standards are actually rising. According to this theory, such a development of capitalism will by itself abolish class antagonisms, or this might have already happened somewhere in the 60s or 70s. So now we'll go to a Marxist critique of such theory, and the first and the main point is that exploitation in capitalism does not depend on the magnitude of the wage. So it's not dependent on how much money you earn when you are working. It's completely irrelevant if you, for exploitation to take place, it's completely irrelevant if you earn 200 or 400 or 400,000 euros a month, as long as they take a wage form. So you cannot quantitatively measure exploitation. You cannot say if you get more than 300 euros a month you are not exploited, but if you get 299 you are exploited. I mean, it's ridiculous. But our spontaneous fetishistic perception of wage, as I spoke about earlier, sees it as a fair compensation for the actual work done, since we don't since we misrecognize selling our labor power as selling our actual labor. So our spontaneous everyday perception, but also the perception of most mainstream sociologists and economists, sees exploitations only in cases of unfairly low wages, which means wages that do not cover our basic everyday needs. So, for example, if your wage is so low that you freeze in the winter, or you don't have enough to eat, or you cannot buy new clothes and walk around in dirty or torn clothes, mainstream sociologists and economists will say, aha, there's some exploitation going on. But what they overlook is that every time a profit is made, every time a surplus value is produced, there was some exploitation going on, even if workers were paid 5,000 euros a month and could buy themselves new cars and MP3 players and iPads and so on. So, but for everyday and also common sociological perception, once capitalist society are in the phase of expansion, once the crisis is over and new cycle of accumulation becomes and wages tend to rise, investment picks up and so on, such cases begin disappearing. So more people get jobs, they earn more money, so they say, okay, there's no more exploitation, case closes. Is of course not the case. Because exploitation is not a fixed concept. It does not measure from here is from this magnitude to this, it's unexploited labor, here it becomes exploited. It's a relational concept which tries to describe or tries to explain antagonistic and complex and also changing, moving social relation. So a concept which explains something which is in permanent movement has to be relational. It cannot be fixed. If you describe social relation or explain not a thing, also the of course concept which explains it has to be relational itself. So what concept of exploitation explains is the relation between the value of labor power, which is the amount of money that covers our everyday needs, and the surplus value, the surplus of value over the value of our labor power, which is produced in the production process. And if, for example, if you imagine huge productivity increases, hypothetically, in some society, for example, South Korea, where they have very developed high technology, and they can achieve this huge productivity leap. So, for example, let's imagine somebody in South Korea invents a machine that increases productivity in every branch of industry in that country by 2. So the productivity is twice that it was. Probably this example, I think it's too complicated and technical. I will elude it. I can go back because I have to draw some equations on the blackboard which I don't have. But we can come back to. But if you're really interested in this productivity example, I see now that it's not really crucial. But we can go back. We have a lot of time. But basically, let's just stick with this. Exploitation is a relational concept, so it is not fixed. You cannot quantitatively pinpoint at which amount of time some wage becomes exploitative or not, because the wage form, the existence of wage form by itself presupposes exploitation. So while we still have wage labor on the one hand and profits on the other, there is exploitation going on without regards how high or low are wages at any point of the capitalist business cycle. Of course, when the accumulation cycle goes up, wages tends to be higher. When it goes down and there's a crisis, they tend to be lower. But this does not by itself influence the level of exploitation. And the same goes for classes and class struggles in capitalism. So even at the peak of capitalism, let's say we are in a rich and developed capitalist country, in the time of the peak of the business cycle, so not like now in crisis. Maybe it appears on the surface that there are no classes, no proletariat, no class struggle, because there are no violent direct confrontation. There are no people striking because everybody has a lot of money, and so on and so on. But classes, the existence of classes and class struggle depends neither on the magnitude of wage, neither on cultural preferences, personal identity, fetishistic illusion, especially in mainstream sociology. I mean, I spent probably 9 or 10 years of my life studying sociology, so I know these things very well, unfortunately. But if you ask ideal average sociologist what are classes in capitalist society, he or she will reply, by classes we mean people with different levels of income. So, for example, if you earn less than, say, 500 euros, you are working class. If you earn between 500 euros and 1,000 euros, you are middle class. If you earn, I don't know, 5,000 euros, then you are probably elite or upper class, and so on. So basically, what sociologists do, they start from these superficial forms of appearance, because we cannot see. I spent about half an hour later to explaining why exploitation is invisible. We don't see the actual process of exploitation. So what do we see on the surface of capitalist society is just economic inequality or income inequality. Some people have little money, some people have a lot of money, some people have no money. And then if we are not Marxist, if we are Marxist, we will ask ourselves, which hidden, which unseen or invisible social process lead to this economic inequality. But if we are common fetishistic sociologists, we will start from these forms of appearance and just classify them. We will not attempt to explain them, but we will just say, we have people with no money, they are underclass. We have people with little money, they're lower class, and so on. We will just classify these fetishistic forms of appearance, we will not attempt to explain them or to take a look which social relations bring them into existence. So basically, this is the main mistake of, let's say, sociological theory of, or mainstream sociological theory of class. And then when you have these neat income brackets, you can also attach some cultural or consumption patterns to them. And then you have this self-explanatory tautological logic. Since people in the upper class bracket have more money, they buy expensive things. And these expensive things also look nice. For example, I don't know, they can buy Audi TT, or they can buy the newest computer, or they can buy really fancy clothes. So sociologists also use these markers, like for example, if you wear a fur coat, you're probably upper class, and so on. Unless you're black, that means you stole it in the latest riots. Then the problem is this sociological theory gets into trouble when it comes to explaining the history or the historical development of classes and class antagonism in capitalism. Because, for example, if you ask these same imaginary sociologists, if you point them to, let's say, Sweden or Norway, or some kind of country with high standards, low unemployment, low poverty, they would say classes do not exist here. They would say everybody is middle class because everybody earns around 1,000 euros a month, everybody drives this same ugly Volvo, so basically it's all, there are no classes, everyone is middle class, so we can say classes no longer exist. But from a Marxist point of view, regardless of the level of wages, or regardless of consumption or cultural patterns, regardless of if people who work for living wear blue collars and these blue overalls of the industrial workers, or they wore white collars and shirts and ties of the modern office worker. So regardless of these cultural consumption properties of the workers, by the very fact that exploitation still exists even in contemporary capitalism, and even in countries with high standards and high wages, it also implies that classes still exist, because classes are not things. Class is a social relation. It's not a property. This is also a fetishistic perception of the class, that it somehow emanates from the actual human beings. Human beings, it's the other way around. Concrete human beings are being assigned to class by certain social relations and social processes. So if you enter social production with bags full of money to invest, then you are assigned to capitalist position. You do not become capitalist by, I mean, how absurd is this fetishistic perception of that, for example, expensive clothes define to which class one belongs. Is if we go back to the example of this black guy who wears a fur coat, you could probably guess that he's either a pimp or a thief. But still, once he puts on a fur coat, that does not make him capitalist. So the ownership of the means of production, a social relation, makes one a worker or a capitalist, not the things you wear. So when the sociologists say, but people don't wear blue overalls anymore, they're no longer dirty, that means proletariat does not exist. I mean, it was never, yes, sometimes, for example, in 19th century Manchester, most of the working class actually wore these classical industrial clothes, and they had dirty faces and so on. But this was never a defining trait that made them working class. It was for them to be assigned to be socially determined as workers. It was never important which type of clothes they wear, or what type of things they buy, or any other things that we use to construct our personal, individual identity. So classes are the effect of class struggle, not cultural or consumer preferences, which might well change over time, and transform working class culture. For example, nowadays working class people do not listen to the same music, they do not socialize in the same ways as in the 19th century, but that doesn't mean that they're more or less proletarian. So the degree of how much one is a proletarian has nothing to do with what do you wear, or which music do you listen to, or what type of food do you prefer. So it's not that, I don't know, proletarians prefer pljeskavica while capitalists eat caviar. I mean, it can be true in this banal statistical sense, but it tells you nothing about how proletarian or how capitalist or how middle class one is. So it's basically you are proletarian if your only means of survival is working for a wage. So if you're not a rentier, if you're not a capitalist, but you still have human needs and need to survive and eat and clothe yourself and pay your costs and your rent, then you have to enter into a wage relation. And once you enter into a wage relation, you become a proletarian. That's it. And you can wear a blue worker uniform, or you can wear a shirt or a tie. It makes no difference to your proletarian condition or to your proletarian position in society. So one last point before we go to the last part of this lecture. What about factories and services? This is the main thesis of the post-industrial society theory, which goes something like this. Capitalism was industrial mode of production, so it depended on a lot of factories. Now we don't have so much factories anymore. They were closed down, or some type of industrial production was moved to China. So maybe in China there is still capitalism, but definitely not in the West, where we have post-industrial society, where we no longer produce bricks or shoes and so on, because those things are now produced in China, including mobile phones, but we produce immaterial services, we produce knowledge, and so on. So cannot we not say that in this knowledge society or post-industrial society we are no longer dealing with capitalism, class struggle, proletariat, and so on? So this is the question we still have to answer to complete our refutation of this middle class society, knowledge society, post-industrial society theory. So basically the question is is a society, again hypothetical of course, if you would go, for example, to a director of BMW in Germany and say, now we are living, I read this book by this excellent sociologist, and he told us that industrial production is over, we now live in post-industrial society where we produce only knowledge. He would probably call psychiatrical emergency. He wouldn't shut down BMW and say, oh my God, what am I doing? We're living in post-industrial society. I have to close down all my industrial facilities immediately. I mean, how deluded am I? But let's take a hypothetical example. Let's take a hypothetical example of a society which really has little or no industry, and most people work in services and do not produce tangible material object like mobile phones, but they produce, I don't know, legal consulting. Let's take, I don't know, Cayman Islands, where most of the work done there has to do with services, tourism, banking, legal consulting, and so on. So here the problem is, again, a type of fetishistic perception that sees a factory with this type of roof and smoke coming out of a chimney, a factory in a classical industrial sense as the only type of workplace or the only possible capitalist workplace. But in actual fact, every workplace which is organized around a capitalist division of labor, which is under capitalist discipline and supervision, and which is organized with the motive and is successful in carrying out this motive of profit making, and which relies on wage labor, is a capitalist workplace. So offices, if we define it in a social, not this fetishistic way, office is no less a capitalist workplace than a classical factory. So even if your whole economy is completely service-oriented, only does services, does not produce any physical or material commodity. It doesn't make it any less capitalist. So, because services, this is also the problem with the theories, for example, post-operist theories like Negri and Harp, theories of immaterial labor, which start from a definition that since products or services are not the classical physical commodities, but knowledge, effects, communication, whatever. So if you go to a legal consultant, you don't go out with you don't come out with I don't know, with a loaf of bread, but you come out slightly smarter because you got good legal advice. And so on. So they use it to say that now all labor is becoming immaterial because the products are immaterial, and that somehow capitalism changed in a profound way, and that our old concepts are no longer adequate. But this is simply not true, because you cannot. This is also a fetishistic perception that you start from the finished product, not with the process of production, and then go back from and then say, I cannot touch a service, for example, legal advice, therefore labor is also immaterial, therefore we cannot explain it. Because if the only difference between, I mean, if a service is sold on the market for money as a commodity, it is no less a commodity than a brick or a pair of shoes or a loaf of bread in the bakery. Although one is an immaterial, one is a material product. But if a product is a product of capitalist production, if it's sold on the market for money, then it's a commodity. I mean, commodity is a social form that a certain thing, immaterial or material, takes. It's not it does not, if you say that somehow immateriality changes the, I don't know, ontological or social status of a commodity, you fall prey to fetishism of commodities, to fetishistic illusions that commodities have certain mystical powers just by being things, not by social relations they enter into. So commodity is defined by the social relations of market exchange and capitalist production that certain things and services enter into, not by their inherent properties like materiality, immateriality. So basically the only, from this point of view, the only real difference between a service, let's say legal advice, and a classical physical commodity like a mobile phone is that in the first case, the process of production and consumption is simultaneous. So when a legal advisor, when I come to his office and pay him for an advice, when he produces this advice, he's talking to me, and I consume this advice at the same time. So the process of production and consumption is simultaneous, goes on at the same time. While if I buy a loaf of bread, a guy at the bakery has to first bake it, so it's a process of production, then it's a process of consumption when I eat it at home. It's not simultaneous, but that's a very banal difference, and it doesn't really change capitalist economy in any profound way. So this concludes my superficial and sketchy refutation of this post-industrial knowledge society, middle-class society thesis. So this is the last part, and it will be shorter than the first two parts. I will finally come to the question of neoliberalism. Since most of recent discussions on capitalism focus on the notion of neoliberalism, and sometimes neoliberalism even replaces capitalism. The notion of neoliberalism even replaces the notion of capitalism, and so we speak about capital. We do not speak anymore about capitalist social relations, but about neoliberal policies, management, state and economy, and so on. So the danger that I see, it's not that I completely disagree with theories of neoliberalism. I think they're very useful. They brought out many features, many fine concrete features of capitalism, which such view, this common Marxist view from way above that I was practicing before, usually overlooked. So, but I think that theories of neoliberalism become problematic when neoliberalism stands in for capitalism itself. You can talk about neoliberalism as a certain way of doing capitalism, but you cannot say that now it's, before it was capitalism, now it's neoliberalism or something. I think in these instances, the whole concept of neoliberalism becomes problematic. And most, especially critical accounts, for example, in Naomi Klein and let's say this late 90s, early 2000s anti-globalization literature, of which Naomi Klein is probably the most famous representative. Most accounts of neoliberalism from that genre still remain trapped into fetishistic categories. And I will mention just a couple of the most symptomatic ones. And one is exclusive focus on income distribution and redistribution. The other is a very, sometimes very problematic way of conceiving the relationship between industry and finance in late or neoliberal capitalism, and the notion of conspiracy of power, the notion that neoliberalism kind of came into existence because certain bad guys like Reagan and Thatcher wanted it to do so, and then that you still have somewhere in the capitalist center, for example, the United States, still these bad guys who want neoliberalism to go on, and then in the periphery, for example, in Macedonia, you have corrupt local elites who listen to imperialist guys from America, and that's why you have neoliberalism. So I think this perception is naive because it presupposes that if you switch these corrupt comprador guys with honest and upright, well-meaning guys who would not listen to bad guys from America, then neoliberalism would go away. I mean, it's much more complicated than that. But let's take these examples one by one. So first, income inequality and redistribution. This critique of how let's say theories of neoliberalism see income inequality and distribution and redistribution might sound very, very technical, but it has some quite important political implication also. But to focus on theory for a couple of minutes. So lower wages, both individual and social wages. What I mean by social wage is the amount of money that is subtracted from surplus value in the form of taxes. So when the state taxes capitalists, deduces a certain amount of money from profits and returns it through social services back to the working class. This is what I mean by social wage. And in neoliberalism, both individual wages and this social wage tend to decrease, and this is probably the most immediately perceptive result of neoliberalism. But still, however true such perception might be, it still remains at the level of the forms of appearance of capitalist social relations. But of course, I mean, of course, absent effective popular resistance, wages do tend to drop in neoliberalism, but we have to take into account wider systemic reasons for it. Wages do not drop in neoliberalism because capitalists are greedy and political elites are corrupt. Greed and corruption itself, that does not mean that greed and corruption, greed on the part of the capitalists and corruption on the part of the politician do not exist, but they're themselves just subjective forms of appearance of deeper systemic relations in capitalism. Even if these particular individuals were honest and altruistic, bosses and politicians would still remain the personifications of those deeper systemic relations. So those forms of appearance, the form of corrupt and lying politician or a greedy and evil boss, they're just symptoms and cannot be done away superficially by installing more competent managers or electing more honest politicians. I think this is a very important political point because a lot of critiques of, especially in the ex-Yugoslav or Eastern European countries in general, a lot of critiques of corruption and greed turn into some kind of auto-racism. This is a quite a recent invention, quite a recent concept by a colleague, Andrea Jovanovic from Belgrade. So since it's a new, rather new concept, I will spend a minute or two on explaining it. But it's a very, very troubling political development, which you probably know from your everyday experience and activism. I mean, I don't know specifically for Macedonia, but this type of auto-racist critique is very widespread in Serbia, especially in Serbia, but also in Croatia and Slovenia. And basically the main logic of this auto-racistic discourse is that somehow greed, incompetence and corruptions, it's a fetishistic view of social relations, one of the many forms of fetishism, which is the nation itself or national culture as somehow autopoetically producing greed, corruption, incompetence, ignorance, laziness, and so on. So this is a type of critique that sees a neoliberal injustices and inequalities, for example, low wages, high unemployment, as if emanating from Bosnian, Serbian, or Macedonian national character. This is I call it the Balkanist auto-racist critique. So, for example, you use racist discourse that is basically racist. So, to see that it is racist, you just need to apply it to another ethnic group. So, for example, when some sociologists or intellectuals talk about Macedonian, for example, talk about we Macedonians, we are lazy, we are kind of culturally retarded. Therefore, it is no wonder that we have low wages, that there is no foreign investment, and so on. Basically, they're using racist discourse, which would become immediately evident if they were talking about Roma or Albanians the same way, or Turkish people or any other minority. But if you apply it to your own nation, then it sounds legit because you are not discriminating against another nation. So basically, you can legitimately be racist. And not only you're racist, you basically don't explain anything. So I think it's also, this is why we have to be careful when analyzing neoliberalism and when choosing in which theoretical way we should approach it. And how should we analyze and critique it? Because we have to be able not only to show that there's something wrong with neoliberalism, we also have to be able to refute competing theories of neoliberalism. For example, auto-racist liberal ones, social democratic ones, which focus exclusively on income and equality and so on.